Welcome back to another Linux gaming video. Today I'll be showing step by step how to install Linux and get it set up for Steam, along with some other useful software that you'll likely want for gaming. In my previous video, Linux Gaming for Noobs, choosing a distro, I went into detail about the differences between the various distros, and gave my personal suggestions on a few of my favorite ones. In a nutshell, for most people, I recommend an Ubuntu-based distro such as Kubuntu, which is what I'll be using in today's guide. Not only is it a good choice for games, but it's also a great general-purpose distro, and there are a ton of guides and resources available for Ubuntu. So that's why I think an Ubuntu-based distro is the best choice for new users. But I also recommended a few other distros in that video. So if you're not sure which one to choose, then you should definitely watch that video first. Now, even though I'll be doing everything today on Kubuntu, the process is very similar on other distros such as Fedora and Arch. So I'll be sure to point out the small differences along the way so that you can follow along with those distros as well. Also, I'm thinking about doing a follow-up video to this one, showing how to install additional game stores other than Steam, including Epic Games, Battle.net, GOG, and more. So if this is something you'd like to see, then be sure to leave a comment and let me know. Alright, so let's get started installing Kubuntu. Now I'm assuming most of you won't want to ditch Windows right away, and will want to dual boot instead, which is why I highly recommend buying a second SSD to install Linux to. While it is possible to partition your Windows drive and install both operating systems on a single drive, I don't recommend doing this as it might cause headaches at some point down the road. I think it's easier just to have each OS on their own drive. So first head over to the download section on Kubuntu's website and select the LTS version, which stands for long-term support. You could choose a newer version if you'd like, but I recommend the LTS version since it will continue to receive updates for a longer time. Once it's finished downloading, you'll need to create a bootable USB drive with it. There are several applications that can do this, including Etcher, which is probably the easiest way. Ventoy is another good option, and it allows you to hold multiple images and ISOs on a single drive. I previously made a video on Ventoy, so check it out if this feature sounds useful. After creating the bootable media, restart your computer and boot into it. Now select Try or Install Kubuntu. When you get to this screen, select Install Kubuntu. Now choose your keyboard layout, then hit Continue. Now make sure you check this box to install third-party software. This will install the required drivers if you have an NVIDIA GPU. If you have an AMD GPU, then checking this box isn't necessary since the AMD drivers are built into the Linux kernel. But it's still highly recommended since it also includes Wi-Fi drivers and additional audio and video codecs, so I recommend checking it either way. Next, the installer will scan your system for connected drives. This might take a minute. Next, make sure you select Guided Use Entire Disk, and then click the drop-down menu to choose the disk you want to install to. Make sure you select the correct disk since everything on it will be erased. Then click Install Now to begin the installation. Hit Continue to confirm. Now select your time zone. Next, enter your username, then enter a password, and then hit Continue. The installer will take several minutes to finish depending on the speed of your computer and internet. Once it's done, hit restart, then you'll see a message saying to remove the bootable USB drive and push enter. Next, enter your system BIOS and ensure that Ubuntu is the first boot option. This sets the default system to boot into. Alternatively, most BIOSes also have a section where you can select which disk to boot into, regardless of which one is set as default, making it easy to switch between Windows and Linux each time you start up your system. When it boots, select the first option, enter your password, and we're now finally in our new operating system. Now, since this is a fresh installation, there will be a number of updates available. click View Updates or simply click this icon to open up Discover. Discover is a GUI application that manages updates, and you can also use it to search for and download new applications. You can see there's quite a few updates available. To install them, simply click Update All in the top right and enter your password. But I'm going to cancel this and instead show you how to update the system using the command line. Most guides and tutorials you'll encounter will use terminal commands, so it's something you should just get comfortable with. It's actually pretty easy. So go to the Start menu and click on Console to open the terminal. Different distros might have different names for their terminal. Now enter sudo apt-update. Enter your password and then wait for it to finish. And then enter sudo apt-upgrade. You'll see it asks, do you want to continue? You can enter Y for yes or N for no. But since Y is capitalized here, yes is the default selection, so you can simply press enter without typing Y. This will probably take a few minutes to finish. Keep in mind that this not only updates the system and drivers, but it also updates all the software and applications you've installed on the system, which is pretty convenient, unlike Windows where you need to update each application individually. Alright, now the system is updated. Also, you might have seen a pop-up here about a language pack or something, so just go ahead and install that as well. Now we're ready to install Steam. Let's first check out Discover and search for Steam. You'll see there's two results for Steam here. The Steam installer is the preferred method since it installs directly to the system. Towards the bottom there's also one that simply says Steam, but on the right hand side it also says Snap. I personally don't recommend Snap packages, so now's a good time to explain the difference between installing an application to the system versus installing with Snap or Flatpak. Applications installed with Snap or Flatpak are placed in what's called a sandbox environment, which is separate from the rest of the system. A sandbox environment provides its own dependencies instead of relying on the system's dependencies. This can be useful if you want the latest version of certain software, since the system dependencies on Debian and Ubuntu-based distros aren't cutting edge and would cause dependency issues with the latest software. Now, I won't be going into detail on all the pros and cons of sandboxed applications, but the main reason why I don't suggest using them is because it makes it more difficult to do certain things. For example, if you want to install games to a separate drive, then you'll need to go through some extra steps to make that drive visible to the sandbox. I think it's much easier just to install applications directly to the system using apt, also referred to as apt. So that's what I'll be doing with Steam. This can be done by installing this package here, but I'll be doing it through the command line since, like I said before, this is something you should just get used to doing since most guides and tutorials use the command line. So first enter this command to add the multiverse repository, which gives you access to a larger number of applications that can be installed through apt. Next, enter sudo apt-update, which is something you'll always want to do before installing a new application. Next, enter sudo apt-install Steam and confirm the installation. This will take a minute to finish. Now, if you're running an Arch-based distro, you'll first need to enable the multilib repo by editing this file here and uncommenting the line for multilib. Then all you need to do is enter this command to install Steam. And if you're running a Fedora-based distro, you first need to enable the non-free repo by entering this command, and then you can install Steam with this command. Okay, we're now ready to run Steam. Go to the Start menu and search for Steam and click on it. Steam will begin an update. Now apparently this specific update had a bug that fails at the end, but all I had to do was run Steam again and the update installed fine this time. Now I'll sign into my Steam account. Alright, and here we are. Now the first thing we'll need to do is go to the settings. You'll notice this looks almost identical to the Windows version. Let's first go to the compatibility tab. This is where we can enable Proton for all games that don't have a native Linux version. Proton is basically the translation layer that allows Linux to run Windows games. All you need to do is click this slider to enable it, and then Steam will need to restart to apply the changes. Now let's go back to the compatibility tab again. You'll see a drop-down list of different Proton versions. In most cases, you'll want to stick to Proton Experimental, since this will provide the most up-to-date version. There's also something called Proton GE, which offers some tweaks and customizations for better performance in certain games. But this is completely optional, so I won't be going over it in this video. Proton Experimental is perfectly fine, so let's just stick with that for the global setting. In some rare cases, certain games might not like experimental, in which case you can force that game to use one of these other Proton versions. But I'll show how to do that later in the video. Now let's install a game. I'll first start off with Dark Souls 3, which doesn't have a native Linux version, so this will install the Windows version, which should run perfectly fine thanks to Proton. And while we're waiting for the game to finish, let's take a quick look at monitor settings. Right-click the desktop and go to Configure Display Settings. Here's where you can change the resolution, scaling, and frame rate of your monitor. I'll leave mine at the default settings, but I just thought I'd point this out. You can also access other system settings from here, such as audio, power settings, and much more. Like I said, KDE is very customizable, so feel free to browse around these settings. Alright, the game has finished installing, so let's run it now. The first time running, it will take a few minutes to start as it'll need to process the shaders. After that's done, your game should start as expected. So I'll go to New Game and just select the default stat so we can quickly get into the game. And as you can see, it's running extremely smooth. Since the recorded video is only 30 FPS, it might not look super smooth through YouTube, but on my monitor, it's running just as you'd expect it to. So now I'll exit and install a different game. Deus Ex Mankind Divided actually has a native Linux version, but it hasn't been updated in a while, so ironically, the Windows version with Proton actually runs better than the native Linux version. So let's go ahead and download it. Alright, now it's finished installing, but since this is a native Linux game, it's not using the global Proton version that we set earlier, so we'll need to force it to use Proton. Right-click the game and go to Properties. Then go to Compatibility and check this box. I'll leave it at Proton Experimental. If any of your other games don't work correctly or have bugs, then this is where you'd force that specific game to run a different Proton version. You'll notice that the game is now doing a pretty large update of around 10 gigabytes since it's now downloading the Windows version, so let's wait for that to finish. Now that it's done, let's run it. And it started up just fine, so now let's try out the benchmark. As you can see, it's running extremely smooth. Keep in mind that this is my backup system with an old Ryzen 2700X and a GTX 980 Ti. The CPU is locked at only 3.7 GHz, which will probably be a big bottleneck for a lot of games. So this is great performance all things considered, and the benchmark numbers prove that. Speaking of performance, it would be nice to have an in-game performance monitor. So let's now go over how to install MangoHud, which can provide almost any statistic you can think of. So I'll search for MangoHud and go to its official GitHub page here. Now scroll down to see how we can install it on Ubuntu. So I'll go ahead and enter this in the command line. Remember that normally you'll want to enter sudo apt-update before installing new software, but since we just recently entered it a little while ago, it shouldn't matter, so I'll just go ahead and install it. Now if you're running ancient games that are 32-bit applications, you'll also want to install this package as well. You'll also notice that installing applications for other distros is usually very similar. The only real difference is instead of using apt, you'll be entering a different package manager instead. And for Arch-based distros, you can install MangoHud with this command. Now let's scroll down to see how to use MangoHud. All you need to do is copy and paste this command into the launch arguments for each game that you want to use it in. So let's go back to the properties of Deus Ex and paste the command here. Now I'll run the game, and MangoHud loaded just as we expected. But you'll notice we only have the CPU and GPU usage and not much else. In order to display more statistics, we'll need to create a configuration file. The instructions are on the GitHub page under the HUD configuration section. So there are multiple ways to set a config file. The first two methods are for setting a config for a particular game, but I'm going to do the third method, which will set a global configuration for all games that use MangoHud. We'll need to create the file in this folder here, so let's do that now. I'll first go to the config folder by entering this path. Now create a new folder and name it MangoHud. Then enter that folder, create a new file, and name it mangohud.conf. Next, double-click the file, which will open a text editor. Now click this link here to get a copy of the configuration file. Copy and paste this into the text editor. You'll notice there are a ton of different statistics here that you can have displayed with MangoHud. In order to activate a certain setting, all you need to do is remove the pound symbol that's in front of the setting you want to activate. If you wanted to set an FPS limit or a global vsync setting, you can also do that here too. But for now, I'll just be activating a few statistics for the GPU and CPU. I'll do GPU temperature, CPU clock, and also GPU core clock. Now save the file by going to File Save, or simply press Ctrl S. Now let's test it out. So I'll go ahead and run Deus Ex again. And as you can see, the temperature and frequency are now being shown for both the GPU and CPU. Like I said, the configuration file has a ton of settings, and you can also change the text size and position of the overlay if you'd like. Now let's install a package called GameMode, which performs a number of optimizations to increase performance in games. Installing GameMode is just as easy as the other packages we've installed. Go to the terminal and enter sudo apt-update, then enter sudo apt install GameMode. If using an Arch-based distro, you can install GameMode with one of these commands. And for Fedora distros, you can install it with this command. Now to enable GameMode in a particular game, all you need to do is enter GameMode run in the launch options like we did with MangoHud. Notice how we already entered command when we enabled MangoHud, so we don't need to enter that part twice. And that's it. Just be sure to enter these launch options for each of your other games as well. Now the vast majority of games will work perfectly fine without any additional launch options, as we just saw with these two games. But there are a small number of games that will require special launch options in order to work correctly. For example, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition is built around DX12 and ray tracing, so you'll need to enter some custom launch options for those features to work. ProtonDB is the best place to find the optimal launch options. Here's the ProtonDB page for Metro Exodus. You can see this user has an AMD GPU, and these launch options worked for him. This user also reported that those same launch options worked for them. So if you have an AMD GPU, this is what you would want to enter. Sometimes NVIDIA GPUs will require different launch options, as we can see here with this user who's running an RTX 3080. Now, everything I've done so far is enough to get you up and running with Steam games. Originally, I was also planning to cover how to install other game stores such as Epic Games, Battle.net, and GOG, but I think this video is already long enough, so I'll be covering this in a follow-up video. If this is something you'd like to see, then let me know in the comments which game stores you want to see covered. The more people who comment, the sooner I'll get around to doing it. I'm also planning to show other useful software for gaming such as ProtonGE, VK Basalt, and overclocking tools as well. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, ProtonGE is a custom version of Proton which offers a number of tweaks and improvements, which can help improve performance in certain games. Now, VK Basalt is another software package that's very similar to Reshade on Windows. It allows you to run post-processing effects to enhance the graphics. None of these tools are essential but are definitely helpful, so again, I'll be covering these in a follow-up video. And one last thing I want to mention, be sure to check out some of my other videos if you're interested in learning about technology and engineering. I cover all sorts of educational topics related to tech. For example, I have a playlist that teaches the basics of electrical engineering and gives a practical foundation on how to design useful circuits for your own projects. I also cover programming, 3D printing, robotics, DIY guitar gear, and other related topics. So if you ever get bored of gaming and want to learn some real-life crafting skills instead, then be sure to check out the rest of my videos. Trust me, the dopamine hit you get from real-life crafting is much more satisfying than crafting stuff in a game. But anyway, that wraps up today's video. If this guide was helpful for you, then be sure to give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. This is the easiest way to help the channel grow. And if you have any thoughts or questions, then feel free to drop a comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.